Welcome to Tocqueville Talks. I'm your co-host, Brent Nelson, and I'm the director of the Tocqueville Center here at Furman University. And as always, I am joined by Beth Larive, our other co-host. And today, we're going to shift our focus from the United States to Europe. And that was part of our November series where we talked about Europe and America. So today, we're going to start with our conversation with Liesbet Hooghe. She is a Belgian scholar of the European Union and party systems in Europe. And I've been an admirer of her for a long, long time. She's one of the giants in our field. And, I'd go to these conferences and hear her speak and wish, oh my goodness, I wish I were as smart as she was or as accomplished. And we get them here, and the best thing is we get to know them as human beings. And I know, Beth, you had some contact with her. What was that like?
Yeah, so she was really interesting to talk to because she obviously has this expertise in her realm that is, next to none. But it was really interesting to watch her bring that into connection to the more Tocquevillian themes that we're concerned with here at the Tocqueville Center. So a few of the things that she talked about was her ability to connect party systems, cultural conflict, and institutional design into a single coherent account of contemporary European politics today, including Europe's new radical right parties. Her analysis shows how Tocqueville's insights about decentralization and the democratic soul still illuminate today's shifting political landscape. And this conversation aligns with the Tocqueville Center's mission to explore how political communities adapt to cultural, institutional, and geopolitical pressures. Mm-hmm. So
we did talk a lot about those things. I was very interested in how she uncovered some of that work on far-right parties, which, of course, we know is a worldwide phenomenon. So Liesbet comes to us from Chapel Hill, where she and her husband, Gary Marks, are professors there, as well as in Florence, where she also has a position. So they come with that kind of background, and let's go to the interview.
So the first thing I was going to ask you about is just basic definitions, and I know they came up last night, but I still think it might be useful to maybe go into a little more depth about the basic far-right replacement that you have proposed in your work for TAN, which is, well, maybe you can just explain.
Absolutely. So we've all been struggling in the field about how to actually come to grips with a new sort of party that's been emerging that is very strongly pushing some cultural positions that are divergent from the dominant cultural discourse that's been going on. And people have sort of called them radical right, far right, hard right, extreme right. And there's something about extremity or off the median that is, I think, valid, because these parties want to be seen as challenging the status quo. But it's the word right, or the concept of right, it has become associated with economic positioning on issues. And so economic right, parties on the economic right are parties that typically would push for lower taxes, smaller government, leaner government, pro-business policies, etc. And these new parties generally don't like to speak about economic issues because what they really want to push is cultural issues. So we've kind of developed this notion of TAN versus GAL, and TAN stands for traditional, authoritarian, or you could say authority-loving, national or nationalist. Because I think that's really what these parties as espouse want to have. Their worldview is based around a notion of community that is a traditional, harks back to traditional values, that is authority binding or authority respectful and maybe authoritarian in some fashion. And that is certainly kind of lifting the national community as something that should be cherished and should be defended against outsiders. And then the other side of this, because we are talking about a new dimension of politics, is GAL. I didn't mention that last night.
I was hoping you would get into that as well.
Green, alternative, libertarian. And these kind of espouse the kind of people in the typical parties in Europe would be green parties, but also social liberal parties. The US has associates, but it doesn't really have very specific parties in our system for it, but people who are close to it. And green would stand for a concern for ecological values, alternative for a respect and a celebration of alternative lifestyles, and that goes for LGBTQ+, feminism, also people with different cultural backgrounds, immigrants coming in our society with different cultural backgrounds. And libertarian, in the sense that individuals should be able to choose their way of life, rather than, fit in a sort of a community, a group sense that, the lifestyle of the community should be directing how people choose their individual life. And so in Europe, it's very clear because you have parties on both sides of that dimension. It's a little bit more difficult to think in Europe. In the US, you have to think about individuals who espouse more one-sided values versus other sides of values. So TAMGAL, it started as a joke.
Okay.
Stuck.
Okay. So, that you think that, your basic argument is that that's more illuminating in the European context from right and left. I'm not sure if you want to talk about maybe the right, would right and left still hold as being more illuminating in America or not? So maybe you can answer that quickly.
The way we've come to think in America is conservative versus liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really very close to TAM versus GAL.
Okay.
We just have different terms, but we really cover the same package.
Okay. And then I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, from a Tocquevillian perspective, this distinction between centralized government power and centralized administrative power. So Tocqueville famously promoted the New England Township as this kind of amazing American thing that had managed to have a sort of central government power, but dispersed, represented like the existence, I guess, to be more clear, of a central government power. Like, they existed in America, in the American United States of America framework, sort of post-Constitution even, and that decentralized administrative power. So where you still have very local involvement in the carrying out. So for taxation, for example, you have like central government maybe establishing what amount will be the federal tax, but you have very local systems that are implementing how the collection of those taxes happen, et cetera. And you contrast that with France. And France is very different because they have centralized both of those things. So you have the centralized government power, but you have the smaller groups across France looking to that central government for how to administer that power. And I was wondering, do you see fruit in that distinction that Tocqueville makes in looking at the European Union today and its structure?
I find that a really interesting question, and I've never thought about it. So let me give it a first try. Right?
Okay, sure.
I'll say something about the European Union, I'll say something about France as an indication of a trend in Europe, I think. The European Union very much works on the principle that what is done in Brussels is as limited as possible. And one big reason, the source of that is, after all, what the European Union is, it's bringing together national states that were hugely administrative machines, massively, very often old, not decades, but centuries old. Think of France, Britain, Germany, 1870, maybe a little one of the younger ones, but many of these states had very old, centuries-old roots and had big administrative institutions that weren't going to be given up to the center. So the way the European Union has developed is really, let's have a thin kind of setting the agenda type of government power, if I can use that word, at the European level, but then the actual money of the actual decisions and the fine-tuning of the decisions, and certainly the administrative capacity to carry them out, will remain national. And so I think that is an interesting unintended adaptation of the Tocquevillian idea, that we can have both. You can pool at a centralized level, but actually maintain a significant level of autonomy in how these decisions are going to be carried out, how they're going to affect people's lives. So that's with respect to European Union, is I think very Tocquevillian perspective is useful. What I want to say about France is, what you said about France is totally right. It was always the example of the ultra-centralized state. Everything was going to be done in Paris, and everything was derivative of what was decided in Paris. And the resources were going to be sent, and the people who were applying these resources in local communities would be essentially agents of Paris. But there's been a ground shift in Europe as a whole, and that includes France now, in the sense that authority has been devolved in real ways, and both administratively and in terms of government authority taking decisions to subnational authorities. And that's, in the French case, to some extent, small towns, the local governments, less so actually, but to a much greater extent, the regions. I mean, France now has, I think it's now there since the recent reform, I just lost count, but I think 15 regions. And the whole purpose, the regions were set up in the 1950s, but over the decades have been strengthened as autonomous sources of authority. And the whole purpose in the most recent reform was actually to copy the setup in Germany, where the states, they're called Länder, are actually very powerful administrative units, the governments, but they're also administrative units. You see the same in Italy, you see the same in Spain for sure. You even see elements of that in Britain, the other unusually centralized system. There it's more built around the big cities. It's a metropolitan system. We call that multi-level governance. Europe has really become a multi-level system, where from the local to the European level, there's genuine authority, element of autonomy, at the same time embedded in an overarching system where there's lots of links between the levels as well. So we got away from the purely the model of centralized states.
So that's really interesting, because Tocqueville brings this up mostly to remark on the difference that he sees in the souls of the people living in these two systems. And he sees in America that there is, because of the centralized, yes, you have centralized government power in the United States Constitution, and with this decentralized at his time still. Now you could argue, is it still decentralized in America? And it seems like maybe there's an opposite trend that you're describing is what's happening in Europe. Yes. Decentralized administrative power. And what he saw as the effect on the soul is that it really cultivates like the virtues that are needed for self-government, and those democratic kinds of virtues that contribute to the preservation of freedom, being able to maybe impede creeping sort of soft despotism. Do you see then, you would expect, I think, if you're from what you're describing in Europe, and as somebody who spends half the year living there, do you see a change on the democratic soul of Europeans because of this increasing decentralization of administrative power?
To be honest with you, most of them push towards what we call multi-level governance, the downward dispersion of authority, the shift of authority from the national to the subnational has been top-down.
Okay.
Right? And it's been driven by functional needs. The type of problems, the type of public goods, the type of things that we expect our governments to deliver have become much more diverse. We want healthcare, we want environmental sustainability, we want roads, we want economic development, we want industrial policy, we want security, right? And some of these public goods are just much more effectively delivered at different levels, different scale levels. So who do I want to pick up my garbage? I don't want Washington to decide about this, right? So let that be at a local level. But when I'm thinking of security, particularly against external threats, it can't be high enough. Right?
Yeah.
And so here it's Washington. In Europe, there's the deep pressures, the strong pressures for a stronger European role in defending the Europeans against. So there's much of the movement has been policymakers realizing they can't do it all. And if they try to do it all, they're going to fail and do half of it badly. So you try to assign policy responsibilities to the levels that seem to be most appropriate. Healthcare, for example, complex hospitals that can do both, open heart operations and emergency units for people, coming in from big car accidents and so forth. Those are expensive hospitals in Europe. A lot of that is public, not private. This is a difference, of course, between the US and Europe. Now, that's best done at a regional level, not the national level, but the regional level. Not local level. Local level is usually doesn't have the resources to pay for these hospitals, to manage, to maintain them. Regional, that groups, multiple local authorities can do that. And you see that's then the regional level. And then other things are better at the national level, and many other things nowadays are, for functional reasons, shifting to the European level. But then your question is, have people updated their way of thinking?
Right.
Has it made them more self-governance, wanting to self-governance. And there I think there is a lag, minimally. I do think in some of the big cities there is a revival of local government, participatory governance.
Interesting.
Before we lived in Florence, we had a lot of connections with Amsterdam. We had an association there with the university, and because I speak Dutch like the people in Amsterdam, I could follow more what was going on. And what struck me there is that Amsterdam, as a big city, is in actuality divided in almost small villages. And each of these villages, and they don't look like villages, they don't have trees and all that type of stuff, but they're sort of sub-communities, would have quite a lively sort of participatory structure. So people would be consulted on how we're going to, rearrange the roads here, or the canals in that particular case, very often, right? What about public transport? We need to close. Often these would be day-to-day issues that people would care about, and people would turn up for these meetings. So maybe that's a Tocquevillian, spirit that is entering there. But I wouldn't take it too far. One has to say much of it has been top down because of the changing functional needs of governing complex societies.
Yeah, and that is very different because the American colonists, it was very much the opposite. It was like they landed and they, were formally obviously still connected to Britain, but they made deliberate choices, the Mayflower Compact, to be self-governing.
They did, but also there was no overarching big government there.
And functionally, it was not there.
Had to, right? They had to combine.
Yeah, and so
to create things that
and
to make their daily life civil.
Yeah, and that's it doesn't seem like that is the case. Like the government is very much there in Europe, even in this disaggregation or decentralization of some administrative authority. So that's really interesting. We're at the time here, so thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today for this great interview with Professor Hooghe. If you'd like to keep up with our upcoming events and lectures and student programming and all the things we do here at the Tocqueville Center, you can visit our website at Tocqueville Center at Furman University. Just Google that name and you will come up with all the good things that we're doing here at Furman University and at the Tocqueville Center. And please subscribe to this podcast so you can hear more of these exciting interviews. And with that, goodbye.